When the town sheriff is caught in a deadly trap deep in the pine woods, only a fearless German shepherd senses something is terribly wrong. Watch how this heroic German shepherd risks everything in a daring rescue that exposes the evil lurking beneath the surface of Timberlake. The courage and loyalty of one German shepherd just might save an entire community from danger. Love true stories of courage and the amazing instincts of a German shepherd. Subscribe now for more unforgettable rescues and heart-stopping moments. Rain pounded the windshield, blurring the lonely pines into dark watercolor smudges as Avery Malone's cruiser crept along the Timberlake back road. It was dusk, the kind of dreary, bone-soaking Washington evening that made every mile feel haunted. Avery, 36, had been sheriff of this out-of-the-way town for barely 3 months, but tonight she drove with the doggedness of someone who had known loss longer than she'd known authority. Her gloved hands tightened on the wheel. Every now and then her gaze flicked to the passenger seat, empty but still holding the memory of Diesel, her old canine partner, her shadow, lost 4 years ago to an avalanche in Colorado. She tried not to think about that night, about the yelp swallowed by snow, about the scar she carried in her chest ever since. Tonight, the woods pressed in, denser, darker. Reports of illegal snares had brought her out here. Avery killed the engine, stepped into the downpour, and flicked on her flashlight. Mud sucked at her boots. Every tree seemed to whisper secrets. She moved with purpose, but under it all was the ache of loneliness, until, slicing through the rain, a bark shattered the stillness. It was rough, low, the kind of bark she heard in dreams and nightmares alike. Avery's pulse hammered. She scanned the blackness, every instinct screaming at her to run toward that voice, to believe the impossible. The bark sounded again, closer, hoarse, but heartbreakingly familiar. Diesel? The name slipped out, lost to the rain. Branches clawed at her as she stumbled through the underbrush. Her flashlight beam trembled over puddles and roots until it landed on a shape huddled in the mud. A battered German shepherd, ribs showing, coat ragged and slick with water. He lifted his head, one ear, notched at the tip, amber eyes, eyes that knew her. Avery fell to her knees, not caring that mud soaked her jeans, that rain plastered her hair to her face. "Diesel," she gasped, voice cracking. The dog gave a weak thump of his tail, almost apologetic, as if he'd tried to get home sooner. She gathered him into her arms, hands shaking. Diesel trembled, exhaustion in every muscle, but nuzzled her shoulder as if to say, "I never stopped looking for you." The rain fell harder, washing away the years between them. Avery's tears mingled with the storm. For a long moment, nothing else existed. Not the loneliness, not the empty seat in her cruiser, not the gnawing guilt that she'd left him behind. Only the warmth of a dog that had survived the wild and somehow, impossibly, found his way back. Diesel was scarred, limping, but alive. The impossible had happened. And as Avery pulled herself and the dog to her feet, rain and hope and disbelief warring inside her, she realized the world had just spun on its axis. Because sometimes, when you think you've lost everything, life finds a way to give you back exactly what you need. Lightning flashed, illuminating the road ahead. Avery clutched Diesel close, heart pounding, and whispered a promise she'd failed to keep all those years ago. "I'm not letting you go again." But as they staggered back toward the cruiser, shadows slithered between the pines. The rain seemed to whisper warnings, secrets half buried in the mud. Diesel's ears twitched, nose working overtime. For Avery, the forest was suddenly alive with both hope and threat, because for every reunion there is a price, and for every lost soul found, something else is waiting in the dark. As Avery loaded Diesel into the car, her flashlight flicked over fresh animal tracks, too large for a dog, too hurried for a deer. In the storm's chaos, she sensed it. This night was far from over, and Timberlake's pines had only just begun to reveal their secrets. The drive back was slower, every bump in the road a test of faith. Diesel dozed in the seat, head on Avery's lap, but flinched at every clap of thunder. As they pulled into town, Avery's thoughts spun. Diesel had survived in the wild for years. How? And why now, of all nights, Had he come back? As Avery looked down at the dog, her partner, her redemption, she understood only one thing. Nothing about her life would ever be the same again. And somewhere, in the woods behind them, something watched. The pines, she thought, remember everything. Avery's cramped office at the Timberlake Sheriff's Station was hardly a place for miracles, but that night it felt transformed. Lamplight pooled on paperwork and radio static buzzed in the background, while the storm battered the windows as if it were searching for a way in. Diesel lay on an old blanket by the desk, his fur streaked with scars, eyes bright but wary. Every time thunder cracked, he flinched, ears flat, body curled defensively around old wounds. Avery moved with careful, almost ritualistic gentleness, her hands skilled but tentative, as if every stroke might startle him back into the wild. She dabbed antiseptic on cuts and plucked out burrs tangled deep in Diesel's coat. Each touch was an apology, each whispered word both comfort and confession. "Easy, boy. I'm here," she murmured, her voice raw from crying. But in the quiet between the rain and the radio, Avery's mind spun with doubt. How could she deserve this? What kind of sheriff was she? What kind of friend, if she let him get lost in the first place? The question pressed in with every heartbeat, every memory of the avalanche, every year she spent telling herself Diesel was gone for good. Suddenly, a timid knock broke the silence. The door creaked open and a boy stepped in, hugging the frame as if it were a life preserver. Noah Whitman, small for 9, with a mop of chestnut hair and the cautious air of a woodland animal. Mud caked his sneakers, and his raincoat, 2 sizes too big, dripped onto the linoleum. Behind him hovered an older woman, her hair a silver braid, eyes clear and sharp as mountain air. Miriam, the reclusive herbalist who lived at the forest's edge. Avery straightened. "Evening, Noah. Miriam, everything all right?" Noah's eyes darted to Diesel, then away, as if afraid to hope. He bit his lip, shoulders tight. Miriam squeezed his arm, steady but soft. "It's all right, Noah." "You can tell her." Noah fidgeted, twisting the hem of his jacket. Is he okay? I saw you take him. He's your dog?" Avery nodded, surprised. "You know Diesel?" Noah glanced at Diesel, who raised his head, nostrils twitching. The boy's voice dropped to a hush. "I've been feeding him in the woods. He let me sometimes, not always." Diesel's tail gave a feeble thump at the sound of Noah's voice. Avery felt a sudden rush of gratitude for this shy, strange child. "Thank you, Noah. I didn't know anyone even saw him." Miriam stepped closer, her presence filling the room with warmth and something else, a kind of gravity. "We've watched him for weeks," she said quietly. "He kept close to the trees. I think he was watching out for us too." Noah crouched by Diesel, moving slowly, letting the dog sniff his outstretched hand. Diesel licked Noah's knuckles, eyes half shut, the faintest sigh rumbling in his chest. For a moment, Avery saw a mirror. Boy and dog, both jumpy, both slow to trust. Noah flinched when thunder rolled and Diesel pressed his side to the boy's knee as if to shield him from the world. Avery swallowed hard, heart aching at the sight. She remembered a time when Diesel was the bravest soul she knew, charging into storms, chasing down threats without hesitation. Now he was scarred, wary, flinching at every sound. She wondered not for the first time if a second chance was something she could live up to. Miriam noticed her silence. "You're thinking you don't deserve him back," she said quietly, reading Avery's grief with uncanny ease. Avery blinked, stung. "Maybe I don't." Miriam touched Avery's shoulder, steady and grounding. "Loss can make us cruel to ourselves. But I lost my daughter to these woods years ago, a hiking accident. Still, I believe kindness never really disappears. Maybe Diesel's return is a sign the forest remembers what we give, good or bad." Outside, the storm began to ebb, rain easing to a patter. Diesel rested his head on Noah's lap, content for the first time to let someone else bear his weight. Avery found herself breathing easier, the room warmer, as if the ache of the years was softening around the edges. Noah ran his fingers through Diesel's matted fur, voice quiet. "He was scared at first, but he always came back for food. Even when I tried to talk to him, he'd just watch, like he was waiting for someone else." Avery knelt beside them, reaching out to stroke Diesel's side. The dog shivered, then relaxed, his body caught between two worlds, fear and hope, memory and presence. She wondered if she looked the same, a survivor, carrying scars invisible to everyone but those who knew what loss felt like. Miriam stood by the window, watching the night. "There are more snares than ever, Sheriff." "I've seen new ones and heard gunshots. People talk of poachers, but some say there's something else, someone targeting animals that help you, Avery, maybe even targeting you." Avery's jaw tightened, resolve flooding her veins. Diesel's return wasn't just a miracle, it was a warning. Whatever haunted Timberlake's woods wasn't done yet. Noah leaned into Diesel, whispering secrets the adults couldn't hear. Miriam clasped Avery's hand, both women bound by grief and hope. For the first time since the avalanche, Avery allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, a second chance wasn't something to be afraid of. But outside, the wind still carried strange sounds. The storm's edge flickered with uncertainty. In the shelter of her lamp-lit office, Avery gathered her fractured courage, knowing that the hardest part of coming home was still ahead. Avery's house was quieter than she remembered, a silence so thick it felt like another presence in the room. The rain, steady and relentless, drummed a rhythm on the kitchen window. Avery leaned against the counter, tea steeping in her favorite chipped mug, her hands trembling as she tried to write. She pressed the ballpoint pen to the first page of a new journal, the paper soft beneath her touch. The words came slowly, haltingly. March 4th. Diesel is alive. I found him, or he found me. I don't know how to explain it, or what comes next. Every so often, her eyes flicked to the floor where Diesel slept on a folded comforter. Even now, indoors, warm and dry, Diesel's dreams were anything but peaceful. His legs twitched, ears flicked, a low growl rising in his throat as if he were chasing something terrible through the dark. The sight made Avery ache. She'd seen that haunted look in the mirror too many times. They were both survivors, marked by what they'd lost and by what they still carried. Lightning illuminated the kitchen. Avery watched Diesel flinch, pressing himself tighter against the comforter, claws flexing. Instinctively, she moved to his side, kneeling in the dim light. She reached out, hands trembling not just with exhaustion, but with guilt that felt bone deep. Gently, she took his scarred paw in hers, her thumb tracing the roughened skin where the fur never grew back. "I'm sorry," she whispered, unsure whether she was apologizing to Diesel, or to herself, or to every moment she'd let grief wall her off from the world. For a while, she just sat there, fingers moving in slow, gentle circles, feeling the heat and the tremor of life beneath the scars. Diesel's breathing deepened, the growl fading. Avery rested her head against his side, feeling his ribcage rise and fall, steady as the rain outside. The house creaked. The clock on the wall marked the slow passage of midnight. Still awake, Avery found herself wandering into the living room, drawn by the hush and the shadows. On a whim, she texted Miriam, half expecting no answer. "Are you still up?" A moment later, "Always," came the reply. "I'll put the kettle on." Minutes later, Avery was wrapped in a blanket at Miriam's small, book-lined kitchen table. Miriam poured tea, moving quietly. Outside, rain tapped a steady lullaby on the roof. Miriam spoke first. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Avery tried to smile. "I feel like I haven't, for years." She looked down at her mug, swirling the tea. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm still there, in the snow. I hear him, Diesel, crying out, and I can't get to him. By the time I dig through, he's just gone. No sound, just white." Miriam reached across the table, squeezing Avery's hand. "You did everything you could." Avery shook her head, swallowing the ache in her throat. "I should have called off the search. I was reckless. I thought I could save everyone, but I lost him. And part of me still wonders if he blames me. If I deserve to have him back." Outside, thunder rolled. Miriam's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "Diesel doesn't blame you. Grief makes us see ghosts where there aren't any. I lost my daughter, Avery. I spent years thinking I could have changed something, anything. But the forest is older than us. It keeps its own counsel. We just have to find a way to live with what it gives and takes." Avery let the words settle. She remembered Diesel's growl, the way he curled into himself in his sleep. He's hurt. More than I thought. He's got new scars. Old wounds that haven't healed. Miriam nodded. I heard talk around town. People saw him near the river, where those poachers set their traps. They said he was trying to free a fox once. Another time, he chased a man away from a snare. Avery's jaw tightened. Someone targeted him. Maybe because of me. Maybe they're trying to send a message. Miriam poured more tea, her movement slow and steady. The woods remember kindness and cruelty. Maybe that's why Diesel came back now. He needed you as much as you needed him. Avery sat in silence, absorbing the weight of that thought. For so long, she'd believed the avalanche was the end. But Diesel had survived. Wounded, yes, but unbroken. She wasn't sure she could say the same about herself. Back at home, the house felt less empty. Diesel stirred as Avery knelt by his side again, her fingers seeking out each old scar. This time, when she whispered his name, Diesel's eyes fluttered open. He nudged her hand with his nose, a small, battered gesture, but enough to send a spark of hope through her chest. The rain eased. Avery wrapped Diesel's paw in a warm cloth, feeling the pulse of life through the bandages. "We're both still here," she murmured. "We both made it out." Diesel closed his eyes, letting out a long, contented sigh. Avery stroked his head, heart a little lighter than it had been in years. As dawn crept in, Avery opened the kitchen window. The scent of wet pine drifted in, mingling with the promise of a new day. She looked at Diesel, at herself, and realized healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant facing the darkness together, step by step. Timberlake was waking up. Birds called, tentative and hopeful. Somewhere in the distance, a fox barked. Avery knew the scars wouldn't vanish, not for her, not for Diesel. But they didn't have to. They were proof of survival, of love that refused to die, of courage that endured even in the shadows. And for the first time since the avalanche, Avery believed maybe it was possible to begin again. Timberlake's morning mist clung to the streets like breath on cold glass. Avery walked slowly through the rain-slicked town square, Diesel pressed close to her hip, nose skimming the pavement, tail low but alert. The town was waking up, but not entirely awake, just a handful of early risers braving the drizzle, eyes half hidden beneath hat brims and umbrellas. Timberlake wasn't a place for easy trust, and Avery, despite her badge, knew that better than most. She paused in front of Maudie's general store, nodding at the owner sweeping the stoop. The old woman's gaze slid warily from Avery to Diesel, lingering on the dog's scars. Avery felt the usual pang of outsider's anxiety, but Diesel seemed to take it in stride, watching Maudie with unblinking patience. He wasn't the dog he'd been in Colorado. He stuck close, flinching at loud noises, tense around strangers. Still, there was something about the way he moved, quiet but steadfast, that began to draw curious glances instead of suspicion. Avery led Diesel around the square, each step a lesson in trust. She offered soft greetings to townsfolk she hardly knew, her voice steadier with Diesel by her side. Near the bakery, an aggressive stray darted from an alley, hackles raised. Avery tensed, but Diesel slipped in front of her with a calm, practiced precision. He stood his ground, quiet but unyielding, until the stray lost interest and slunk away. Only then did Avery realize her breath was caught in her chest. Diesel looked up at her, eyes steady. She managed a shaky laugh, her hand brushing his head. "You still remember your training, huh?" Diesel's tail wagged once, reluctant but real. Later that morning, Timberlake Elementary's playground was a whirl of color and sound. Avery and Diesel skirted the fence, watching as children chased each other in the drizzle. The noise, the chaos, the sudden shouts. Diesel flattened his ears and pressed closer to Avery, but she crouched, grounding him with her touch. "We're safe," she whispered, unsure if she meant it for him or herself. Walt Porter, her gruff, broad-shouldered deputy, met them by the school steps. His presence was quiet but solid as a granite boulder. He gave Diesel a once-over, nodding approval. "Heard you two ran off astray this morning," Walt said. Avery shrugged. "Diesel did most of the work." Walt's voice softened, a rare thing. "Folks are starting to talk. Maybe it's time we rebuild the K-9 unit. This town needs something to believe in. And you need it too, Avery." The words struck deeper than Avery expected. For so long she'd held herself apart, hiding behind her grief, afraid to reach for hope again. Now, with Diesel at her side, the thought of building something new, a team, a purpose, felt almost possible. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Sheriff Malone?" Noah stood nearby, clutching a sheet of paper. His face was red from the wind, but his eyes were bright with pride and anxiety. I drew something for Diesel." He handed Avery the picture, crayon lines and careful strokes. It showed Diesel standing tall, a badge at his collar, surrounded by towering pine trees. At the bottom, in shaky letters, "The bravest dog." Avery knelt, showing Diesel the drawing. The dog's nose twitched, tail thumping once, and Noah's face split into a shy grin. He's not scared when I'm with him," Noah whispered, almost as if confessing a secret. Avery's throat tightened. "He's lucky to have a friend like you, Noah." Walt watched the exchange, his gruff features softening further. "That dog's a bridge, Avery. You can feel it. He's already bringing folks together." Diesel seemed to sense the shift in the air. He stood a little straighter, edging closer to Avery and Noah. The circle widened. Parents, teachers, even skeptical townsfolk pausing to watch. For the first time, Avery felt her isolation thinning. Diesel was more than a reminder of her loss. He was a symbol of hope for a town that had almost forgotten how to trust. The moment didn't last. Jenna Park, Timberlake's wildlife ranger, jogged up, face set with worry. Mud clung to her boots, and she carried the battered authority of someone who spent more time with animals than people. "Avery, you need to come with me. Something's wrong." They followed Jenna through the woods behind the school. The trees here grew close, roots twisting in the soft ground, branches draped in moss. Rainwater ran in silver rivulets down the trunks. The forest felt ancient, older than any grief Avery had ever carried. Jenna stopped beside a patch of broken fence. Beyond it, the undergrowth was trampled, the earth torn up as if something large had passed through in a hurry. She pointed to a set of muddy paw prints, claw marks deep and frantic. "A bear cub's missing," Jenna said. "We've found broken snares, blood on the leaves. People heard gunshots last night." Avery felt Diesel stiffen, hackles raised. The sense of threat so long pushed aside flooded back. Someone was hunting in Timberlake's woods, escalating their cruelty, targeting the vulnerable, risking the lives of the animals and, by extension, the people who cared about them. Walt squatted beside the tracks, face grim. "This isn't just about poaching anymore. Whoever's out here, they're getting bolder." Jenna's jaw clenched. "If they're not stopped, it won't just be animals getting hurt." Avery looked down at Diesel, feeling his strength steady her. She met Jenna's gaze. "We'll find them. Whatever it takes." For a moment, the four of them, Avery, Diesel, Walt, Jenna, stood shoulder to shoulder in the shadow of the pines, united by a cause bigger than their own pain. Avery felt something deep inside her shift, roots sinking through old scars, binding her to the land, the people, and to the dog who'd never really left her side. As the rain slowed and the clouds broke, Avery realized healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but planting something new in the space it left behind. Timberlake was wounded, but not broken, and maybe, just maybe, it was ready to trust again. The forest before dawn felt almost holy. Damp needles underfoot, air sharp with sap and rain, the first blue light barely peeling back the dark. Avery moved quietly between the ancient trunks, boots sinking into moss. Diesel padded just ahead, every sense alive, muscles taut as piano wire. The storm had washed Timberlake's woods clean, but left behind the metallic tang of fear and old secrets. Avery's flashlight cut a narrow path through the gloom. Somewhere behind her, a crow called once, then fell silent. She paused, breathing in the hush. In the half-light, the world felt thin and vulnerable, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Diesel froze, one paw raised. Avery crouched beside him, following his gaze to a tangle of brush ahead. Something had thrashed through here. Broken branches, muddy scrapes, tufts of fur snagged on bramble. Avery's heart pounded. She reached down, gently pushing Diesel's muzzle aside as she knelt to study the ground. There, the gleam of metal, almost invisible beneath the leaves. A snare. Fresh, the wire still glistening with dew. Not 20 feet away, a deer lay on its side, breath coming in thin, shuddery bursts. Its leg was twisted, caught in another loop of wire. Avery's throat tightened. She moved slowly, whispering soft, steady words as she worked the snare loose, Diesel pressing close to block the deer's wild, rolling eyes from the sight of the human hands. As the deer struggled free, it limped away on 3 legs, vanishing between the pines. Avery watched it go, her own relief tempered by fury. She hated snares, hated the way they turned the forest into a trap, hated what they said about whoever set them. Diesel circled back to her, nose low, as if searching for a threat that still lingered. Suddenly the forest snapped awake. A distant crack, the unmistakable report of a rifle. Avery spun, pulse racing, scanning the trees. Diesel dropped instantly, belly to the ground, eyes fixed on a shadow shifting among the ferns. Avery's radio hissed static, no signal, no backup. She mouthed a curse, adrenaline burning through her exhaustion. Diesel nudged her knee, eyes intent, body low and ready. Avery felt a wave of fear threaten to rise, but Diesel's presence anchored her. She remembered 100 nights on the trail, his confidence guiding her through danger she couldn't see. Her breath slowed. She crouched behind a fallen log, pressing a shaking hand to Diesel's back. "We're not alone," she whispered, and Diesel's ear flicked in silent understanding. The woods seemed to close in, every leaf and branch holding its own secret. Avery scanned the shadows, the sense of being watched tightening around her. She remembered Walt's words from the day before. "Trust Diesel. He never left you, even when you thought he did." Avery's gaze dropped to the mud at her feet. A scrap of paper lay half buried beside the root of an old pine, soggy, edges torn, but clearly marked with faded ink. She pulled it free, smoothing it across her knee. A crude map, trails zigzagging between hand-drawn trees, a series of strange symbols scrawled along the margins. Her stomach clenched. Someone had been here recently, someone with a plan. Diesel snuffled the air, growling deep in his chest. Avery folded the map, tucking it into her jacket. She eased to her feet, careful to stay in the shelter of the trees. "We go slow," she whispered, and Diesel moved with her, a shadow at her side. They moved deeper into the woods, senses straining for any sign of movement. The air thickened with fog as the sun struggled to rise. Avery forced herself to think past the fear. Illegal snares, wounded animals, a missing bear cub, the feeling that every step brought her closer to a line she could never uncross. Diesel stopped abruptly, ears pricked. Avery followed his gaze to a glimmer of something bright among the roots. A piece of torn orange fabric snagged on a low branch. She pocketed it, heart hammering. It matched the color of the ranger vests Timberlake's volunteers wore. Someone else had been out here, maybe chased or ambushed. As Avery stood, she caught a flicker of motion, a shadow darting between 2 firs, impossibly quick. She ducked behind a tree, holding her breath. Diesel stayed perfectly still, nose working overtime, eyes never leaving the shadow. For a long moment, nothing moved but the mist. Avery's mind raced with possibilities. Poachers, yes, but what if it was something more, something that knew the woods better than she did? A sudden crash, a branch breaking to the left. Avery tensed, every muscle ready to run or fight. Diesel pressed close, lips peeled back in a silent snarl. The memory of the avalanche pressed in, panic, helplessness, the awful certainty of being alone. But Diesel was here. This time, she wasn't alone. Slowly, Avery raised her head above the log, scanning for movement. Nothing, just the whisper of wind through the pines, the soft hush of something watching. She reached down, scratching Diesel behind the ear, voice barely a whisper. "You lead. I'll follow." As the fog began to lift, the forest seemed to exhale, a promise and a threat woven into the same breath. Avery took a cautious step forward, Diesel slipping silently into the lead. They would find whoever was setting the snares. They would stop the pain. She had to believe it. Behind her, the pines kept their secrets, but the bond between woman and dog was unbreakable, tempered by loss, forged anew under the rain-soaked canopy. They pressed on, deeper into the heart of Timberlake, where danger waited in the silence and hope flickered like dawn among the trees. The twilight was thick with fog, turning the forest into a world of drifting shadows and uncertain paths. Avery's boots sank into damp leaves, the ground soft beneath her steps, her flashlight barely slicing through the shifting gray. Diesel prowled at her side, every sense on high alert, ears flicking, nose quivering at scents too subtle for any human. Avery's pulse drummed in her ears. She'd spent the last 2 days tracing the map she found in the mud, following the odd symbols and broken trails deeper into Timberlake's wildest reaches. Each clue led further from town, each mile layered with silence and the prickling sense of being watched. Tonight the forest felt different. Dangerous in a new way. She paused at a split in the path, studying the tangle of prints in the muck. Boot tracks, fresh and hurried, circling back on themselves as if whoever made them was either lost or laying a trap. Diesel stopped, tail stiff, hackles raised. "Easy, boy," Avery whispered, her voice barely more than mist. Diesel pressed closer, his body tense, muscles ready to spring. Suddenly, from behind, a branch snapped. Avery spun, flashlight beam catching only the swirl of fog. She barely registered the movement before rough hands seized her from behind, wrenching her arms back. Her radio skittered from her belt, tumbling into the undergrowth. Before she could scream, a coarse rag was shoved over her mouth. Panic surged, memories of the avalanche, the feeling of helplessness flooded her body. Diesel barked, a sharp, furious sound, then a blow landed, a grunt, claws scrambling. Through the chaos, Avery glimpsed masked figures. 2, maybe 3, faces covered by dirty scarves, eyes gleaming with desperation and malice. They dragged her to a tree, jerking her arms behind her back. Rope bit into her wrists. She struggled, kicked, but they were strong, angry. Her blood ran cold as she caught the glint of a knife in the fading light. "Thought you could play hero, Sheriff?" one hissed, voice muffled but vicious. "Not out here." Avery spat the rag out, choking on rage and rain. "You're hurting animals. You're hurting people." A backhand silenced her, stars exploding behind her eyes. The world tilted, thunder rolling in her skull. She heard Diesel barking, snarling, the wet snap of underbrush as he fought to reach her. But another masked figure grabbed at him, swinging a branch, driving him back. Avery's heart broke at the sound. Her partner, her only hope, separated by force. Night thickened around her. Her wrists ached from the rope. Blood from a cut on her forehead dripped down her cheek, stinging her eye. She struggled to stay upright, to stay present. Diesel's distant yelps grew frantic, then faded as he was forced away. The poachers rifled through her pockets, grunting over the torn map, the orange scrap. One tore her badge from her jacket and flung it into the mud. "You think you can stop us? You and your mutt? This is our land now." Avery glared up through the blood and fog. "You'll never get away with this. Someone will come." They laughed, a hollow sound that bounced between the trees. "Not tonight." They melted back into the woods, leaving her bound and bleeding, lashed to a thick pine. The world shrank to darkness and pain. Every sound, each drip of rain, each flutter of leaves, became a threat. Avery tried to focus, fighting the rising panic. She closed her eyes and whispered Diesel's name, forcing herself to breathe slow and deep. "You never lost him. He never left you, even when you thought he did." Walt's words echoed in her mind, grounding her against the terror. "Diesel," she breathed, voice cracking. "Find me, please." Miles away, how far she couldn't know, Diesel tore through the woods, following her scent with single-minded fury. Each step was agony. His side bled from a glancing blow, his old limp pronounced. But he ran anyway, driven by a force deeper than memory, deeper than pain. Somewhere in Timberlake, Noah jerked awake, sweat-soaked and certain something terrible had happened. He bolted upright, clutching the sketchbook he always kept close. Images flooded his mind, Avery in danger, Diesel running wild, the pines swallowing them whole. He scrambled from bed, racing to his grandmother's room. "Miriam," he cried, "something's wrong. Avery, Diesel, they need help." Miriam believed him instantly. She wrapped him in her arms, then called Walt, her voice urgent. Walt didn't hesitate. He gathered his gear, pulling on boots and a jacket, and met Noah at the edge of town. Noah, trembling but determined, opened his sketchbook to a crude but heartfelt drawing. The forest, a winding trail, the tree where he always left food for Diesel. "They're here. I know it," he whispered. Walt nodded, heart heavy but full of resolve. "Lead the way, kid. We'll find them." Back in the forest, Avery's world was shrinking, her body numb, breath ragged. She heard something, a low, desperate whine. Diesel, crawling through the underbrush, nose bloody, eyes wild. He bit at the ropes, snarling, teeth flashing in the gloom. Avery blinked through tears, barely able to move. "You found me," she whispered. Diesel worked frantically, jaws locked on the knots, refusing to let go even as blood spattered the leaves. The ropes loosened. Avery collapsed forward, barely conscious, and Diesel nudged her awake, licking her cheek, refusing to leave her side. In that darkness, under the ancient pines, hope pulsed through Avery's battered heart. She clung to Diesel's fur, drawing strength from his courage. They weren't out yet, but they were together. And together, they'd find a way home. Dawn pressed against the pines with a pale, unsteady light, pushing the last shreds of fog through the forest. The world felt bruised, colors smeared by exhaustion, the earth sodden and trampled by too many desperate feet. Somewhere deep in Timberlake's woods, Avery hovered between waking and oblivion. Her wrists stung, lips split, head throbbing. Diesel lay across her legs, chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, refusing to leave her even as the night bled away. She tried to move, but her limbs felt as heavy as stone. Every sound, birdsong, distant branches cracking, seemed far away, unreal, like echoes from another life. Diesel shifted, nuzzling her hand, his eyes pleading, "Stay with me." Avery blinked, fighting the black tide threatening to pull her under. She looked at Diesel's battered body, the wounds on his flanks, the mud caked in his fur. Guilt surged again, but it was softer this time, dulled by awe. He had come for her. He had always come for her. The forest began to stir. Somewhere not far off, a voice called out, ragged with worry, "Avery! Avery Malone! Diesel!" It was Walt, gruff, dependable Walt, the deputy who never raised his voice unless it mattered. Footsteps crunched through the leaves. Another voice, gentler, steadier. "Hold on, we're coming." Noah, clutching his sketchbook, raced through the trees, his small legs churning through mud and roots. Miriam followed, her hair wild from the run, eyes fierce with hope. Walt was the first to reach them. He dropped to his knees, heedless of the muck, and pressed two shaking fingers to Avery's throat, searching for her pulse. "She's alive," he said, relief breaking through his stoicism. He touched Diesel's head, voice cracking for the first time in years. "Good boy, good boy." Noah skidded to a stop, his face white with fear, eyes shining with unshed tears. He dropped beside Diesel, arms wrapping gently around the dog's neck. "You did it, buddy," he whispered. "You brought her home." Miriam knelt beside Avery, pulling her into her lap, murmuring reassurances only another grieving soul could offer. For a long moment they stayed that way, tangled in mud and fear and love, surrounded by the hush of the waking forest. Then the search party arrived. Jenna Park, Rachel the rookie officer, a handful of townsfolk clutching flashlights and blankets. They gathered in a wide circle, closing ranks around Avery and Diesel, their faces tight with worry and relief. Walt pulled off his jacket and draped it over Avery's shoulders. "You never lost him," he said quietly, nodding at Diesel. "He was just waiting for you to come home." Avery wept, silent, racking sobs that shook the last of the cold from her bones. Diesel licked her hand, his tail thumping weakly. The circle closed tighter, arms steadying her, hands brushing Diesel's fur, the hush of gratitude and awe settling over them. The sun broke through the clouds, slanting gold across the clearing. For the first time in years, Avery felt not only seen, but surrounded, protected not just by duty, but by the faith of a town that had quietly longed for healing. Jenna, kneeling beside Diesel, gently lifted his hind leg and examined the old, jagged scars. She glanced up at Avery, her expression grim but resolute. "These wounds, they matched the snares. He was targeted, just like you suspected. But he made it out. He found you." Walt pressed the torn map into Avery's hand, his voice sure and solid. "We found this on the way. There's a trail marked here that leads to an old shed north of the river." That's where they're hiding. Rachel radioed for backup, her hands steady for the first time since joining the force. The townsfolk murmured, shifting uneasily. But as Avery forced herself upright, Diesel at her side, she saw something new in their eyes, not just concern, but determination. "We'll go together," she managed, voice hoarse but gaining strength. "No one stands alone anymore." Walt gripped her shoulder. "That's how we do it here." Noah pressed his sketchbook into Avery's hands. "I drew a map, in case you get lost again." She looked at the scribbled lines, at Diesel's lopsided smile drawn in bright green crayon. For the first time, Avery felt the heavy stone of guilt ease in her chest. She squeezed Noah's hand, feeling hope spark inside her like a small, stubborn flame. They moved slowly back toward the edge of the woods, Walt carrying Diesel when the dog's legs gave out, Miriam guiding Avery with an arm around her shoulders. The townspeople closed in around them, murmuring thanks, offering food and water and gentle touch. When they reached the road, the ambulance was waiting. Avery hesitated before climbing in, turning to look at the people who had become her family. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. Walt shook his head, gruff as ever. "We always come. That's what families do." Noah leaned into Miriam, tears drying on his cheeks. Diesel, exhausted but proud, lay across Avery's feet, tail sweeping the dust. The town, once fractured, wary, lost, stood united, bound by the courage of a battered dog and a sheriff learning to forgive herself. As the ambulance doors closed, Avery caught one last glimpse of the pines. The sun filtering through the branches looked like a promise, a new beginning, as fragile and fierce as hope itself. A gray, heavy morning settled over Timberlake, the sky still weeping gentle rain as Avery and her team readied for the day they all knew was coming. The air in the sheriff's office crackled with a new energy, a combination of resolve and nerves, of people waking up not just to danger, but to their own sense of purpose. Avery, wrists bandaged, face bruised, pulled on her uniform with a trembling, determined hand. Diesel rested at her feet, scarred but healing, his gaze unwavering as he watched every move she made. By the time Walt, Jenna, and Rachel arrived, the sun was barely a memory behind the clouds. They gathered around the battered map Avery had found in the mud, the same one that had nearly cost her everything. The lines were smudged, symbols blurred by rain, but the path was clear, north of the river, past the twisted cedar, to the abandoned shed. That was where the poachers were hiding, and where Timberlake's stolen peace waited to be reclaimed. Walt adjusted his belt, voice low and steady. "We do this careful. No more running in alone." Avery nodded. She looked to Rachel, whose jaw was set in determined defiance of her rookie nerves. "Stay behind Walt or Jenna. If you see the signal, call for backup. And no one gets left behind." They moved out as a team, Diesel leading the way, nose low, body alert. Rain slicked the world in shades of gray and green. Avery felt every bruise, every scar, but she drew strength from the dog beside her, and from the knowledge that, for the first time in a long time, she was not alone. The trail wound deeper into the pines, mist tangled between branches, birds held their breath. The world narrowed to mud, footprints, and the sharp pulse of adrenaline. Avery found herself thinking of the first time she had ever tracked a suspect with Diesel years ago, how the dog had always known the way, even when she'd lost all sense of direction. They reached the river, its surface glassy, reflecting the anxious faces above. Diesel's nose twitched. He growled low, pointing with his snout toward the far bank. Avery followed his gaze. Tire tracks, boots. Someone had dragged something heavy through the mud. The shed crouched under the trees, gray and sagging, half swallowed by brambles. A single lantern glowed behind a boarded window. The team crept closer, hearts pounding. Avery's hand brushed the grip of her sidearm, but it was Diesel's low, warning bark that stilled her nerves. He slipped forward, weaving between roots and shadows, until he paused at the threshold, body rigid. Inside, a chorus of noises, panicked yelps, snarls, the clatter of chains, broke the silence. Walt nodded to Avery. She kicked the door open. Walt and Jenna swept in behind her, Rachel at their back. Chaos erupted. 3 masked poachers lunged up, weapons flashing in the dim light. Diesel charged, no hesitation, just the full, fearless force of his loyalty. He barred the escape, body a living wall between the poachers and the open door. The men shouted, pushing, scrambling for a way out. One tried to leap past, but Diesel met him with a snarl, teeth bared, blocking every move. Jenna dashed for the far corner where a small bear cub whimpered, paw bloodied, chained to an old radiator. She unclipped the shackle, scooping the terrified animal into her arms. "You're safe now," she murmured, voice trembling. Avery trained her sidearm on the ringleader, a thick-set man with a jagged scar over one eye. "It's over. Drop your weapon and get on the ground." The poacher sneered. "You think you can save this place? You think a broken dog and a handful of bleeding hearts make a difference?" Avery's voice was steady as stone. "You underestimate the power of loyalty, of community, and of a dog who refuses to quit." Diesel's presence, fur bristled, teeth bared, eyes blazing, left the poachers nowhere to run. Their bravado cracked. One after another they dropped their weapons, hands in the air. Walt cuffed them, reading their rights with grim satisfaction. Rachel stood by the door, eyes wide but shining. "We did it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Jenna passed the bear cub to Miriam, who had arrived with a crowd of townsfolk, Noah at her side. They cheered, clapping, some weeping openly as Diesel limped to Avery's side, pressing his battered body against her leg. Noah knelt and hugged Diesel, whispering thanks. The townspeople surged forward, Maudie from the general store, the school principal, even the bakery twins, offering blankets, food, and soft words to Avery and her battered team. Amid the chaos, Avery looked around, at the wild hope in people's eyes, at the bear cub being cradled by Miriam, at the poachers subdued and finally powerless. The old pain in her chest eased, replaced by a pride so fierce it nearly made her weep. Walt took off his hat, voice thick with emotion. "It took all of us. And this dog." The townspeople began to murmur, plans, hope, outrage, and purpose. Jenna spoke up, her arm around the bear cub. "We could build a wildlife rescue center. No more abandoned animals, no more snares. Timberlake can do better." The crowd rallied, voices rising, the spark of community spreading like sunlight through rain. "For Diesel!" someone shouted. "For Avery! For Timberlake!" Avery knelt beside Diesel, tears shining in her eyes. "We made it, partner. We brought them home." For the first time, Avery didn't feel like the last one standing. She felt like a piece of something bigger, bound together by loss, hope, and the courage to fight for the pines and every soul who called them home. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Timberlake Elementary's gymnasium, painting golden pools across the hardwood floor. The scent of pine, never far from anything in this town, mingled with the breathless anticipation of children and adults alike. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage, where a banner, hand-painted by the students, read, "Welcome home, Diesel." Avery stood at the edge of the stage, her uniform pressed, the bruises fading from her face, but not yet forgotten. Her nerves fluttered as the crowd settled. Diesel sat faithfully at her side, head high, coat brushed and shining where the scars didn't interrupt the light. In the front row, Noah gripped his ever-present sketchbook, knuckles white with excitement. Beside him sat Miriam, steady and warm, and Walt looking proud but self-conscious in his Sunday shirt. The gym was packed. Parents, teachers, the bakery twins, Maudie from the general store, even Jenna with her arm in a sling from the rescue. Timberlake, fractured for so long, now hummed with something new, belonging. Avery looked down at Diesel, her heart full. For years she had seen only the loss, her canine partner swallowed by an avalanche, her own faith buried beneath it. But now, in the gentle hush before she spoke, Avery saw more than a dog at her feet. She saw a survivor, a friend who had never truly left her, even when the world insisted he was gone. She took a breath and began. "I want to thank all of you for being here. Not just for me and Diesel, but for each other. For Timberlake." The microphone's echo was soft, the only sound the patter of a basketball rolling somewhere in the distance. "I thought loss was an ending. For years I thought I would never see Diesel again. And that meant I stopped believing in a lot of things, including myself." She glanced at Noah, whose shy smile anchored her. "But sometimes," Avery continued, her voice growing steadier. Loss isn't a wall, it's a door. Diesel found his way back. He survived, scarred but unbroken. He taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of our story. If we keep walking, if we don't give up, sometimes we find the ones we thought we lost. The children leaned forward, eyes wide. Parents squeezed each other's hands. In that silent, listening space, Avery felt her voice catch with truth. Diesel's courage wasn't just in chasing down bad guys. It was in learning to trust again, letting me touch him after all those years in the wild, sleeping by my side, protecting a town he barely knew. My own courage was facing my guilt, letting myself ask for help, even when it was easier to shut the world out. Real bravery is showing up, even after you've been hurt. She looked around at the faces, Noah, trembling but proud, Miriam, whose eyes brimmed with memory, Walt, whose loyalty was the quiet glue holding them all together. It was Noah's kindness, feeding Diesel when no one else would. It was Miriam's faith that the forest remembers goodness, Walt's patience, Jenna's advocacy, Rachel's courage. Every small act of care, the ones we think no one sees, are the reason Timberlake is still standing. Healing rarely happens alone. Sometimes one act of kindness, one gesture, ripples out and changes more lives than we'll ever know. A hush fell. Outside, birds sang as if to agree. Avery smiled, realizing how much she meant it. Diesel became the heart of Timberlake. He brought us together, me, Noah, Miriam, Walt, all of you who've ever felt like outsiders. We didn't just rescue Diesel. He rescued us, showing us that belonging isn't something we're born with. It's something we build, together. She knelt beside Diesel, the dog looking up with quiet devotion. The applause began softly, then grew, children clapping, adults joining in, a wave of warmth and hope. Noah stood, cheeks flushed, and walked shyly to the stage. He handed Avery a fresh drawing, Diesel leading children through a sun-dappled pine forest, their hands linked, the words, "Thank you for bringing us together," written in bold, careful script at the top. Avery hugged Noah, then held the drawing high for everyone to see. "There are scars that don't fade," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "But those scars mean we survived. They mean we can help others find their way through. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is come home, even when you're afraid you don't belong anymore." Diesel barked, a single joyful sound that echoed in the rafters. The children cheered, running up to stroke his fur. The adults followed, breaking the invisible wall that had divided Timberlake for too long. Laughter spilled across the gym, as bright and wild as summer rain. In the swirl of hugs and handshakes, Avery caught Miriam's eye. The older woman nodded, a silent promise that grief would never again be carried alone. Walt stood with Diesel, ruffling his ears, the two veterans, man and dog, sharing a quiet understanding. As sunlight warmed the gym and hope settled deep into Timberlake's bones, Avery knew their story had changed more than her own life. It had changed the town, the people, and the very way they'd face whatever came next. And as she hugged Diesel, surrounded by the family they'd made together, Avery finally felt what she hadn't let herself feel in years. She was home. The sun was setting above Timberlake, pouring gold through the ragged pines and bathing the whole hilltop in a light so soft it seemed to promise forgiveness. The townsfolk gathered for their annual summer picnic, an old tradition revived at Miriam's gentle insistence, but this year it was different. This year, laughter rose easily. Children darted around the picnic tables, chasing each other and Diesel across the meadow, the dog now strong, fur shining in the last rays. Avery stood at the edge of it all, a plate of apple pie cooling in her hand, her gaze stretched over the place she had once feared she'd never call home again. Diesel bounded past her, tail high, barking at a cluster of children who squealed and scattered in delighted chaos. Noah sat nearby, sketchbook balanced on his knees, capturing the sunset and the swirl of friends around him. The music from a single guitar mingled with birdsong, and the town, Timberlake, battered and hopeful, felt, for a rare moment, utterly at peace. Beside Avery, Miriam watched the horizon, her smile touched with sadness and pride. Walt stood close, his usual reserve softened as he shared a joke with Rachel and Jenna, both still in uniform but more relaxed than Avery had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of pine, barbecue smoke, and hope. Avery took a deep breath, letting it fill her chest. For the first time in years, she felt the weight in her heart loosen, replaced by something lighter. Gratitude, maybe, or simply relief. She looked down at Diesel, who sat beside her, gazing up as if to say, "We made it." The townspeople called her forward, voices rising in encouragement. She hesitated, unused to standing in front of a crowd without a crisis to address, but Diesel nudged her with his nose, urging her on. She stepped onto a low bench and turned to face them, her family, her town, all of them drawn together not by tragedy, but by survival and new beginnings. She raised her voice so all could hear, her words clear in the hush. "I want to thank every one of you for not giving up, for finding hope even when it was hard, and for helping each other come home. Pain and loss can break us, but they also teach us what matters." Diesel's scars, my own, and even Timberlake's, they're reminders that every ending can be a beginning if we open ourselves to the next chapter. She paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. She caught Walt's steady gaze, Miriam's gentle nod, Jenna's beaming smile, Noah's shy grin. "We thought Diesel was gone forever, but he found his way back, and so did I. Second chances are real. Sometimes they look like a battered dog in the rain. Sometimes they're the hand you reach for when you're falling." A ripple went through the crowd, voices murmuring agreement, eyes glistening. Avery pressed on, her tone turning fierce. "Look out for each other. Stand up for the voiceless, animal or human. If someone is lost, be the one to guide them home. That's how we make a town into a family. And that's what I hope you carry with you from Diesel's story." She looked down at Diesel, and for a moment the noise faded, leaving only the sound of wind in the pines and her partner's breathing beside her. "We didn't just rescue Diesel, he rescued us. He reminded us that hope, once planted, can outlive any storm." Avery turned to the crowd, letting her voice reach every corner of the hilltop. If this story moved you, leave a paw print in the comments. Share your own story of rescue or healing. And if you want to hear more true tales of courage, kindness, and second chances, subscribe and stay with us. This is just the beginning. A round of applause surged up, loud and joyful, more than Avery had expected. She stepped down, overwhelmed, as Diesel pressed against her legs, leaning into her warmth. All around them, people hugged, children played, music floated through the dusk. As night settled, Avery, Diesel, Noah, and Miriam wandered a little away from the crowd, to the hill's edge where the town's lights blinked on below. They sat in the hush, Diesel's head on Avery's knee, Miriam's arm around Noah's shoulders. Avery stared into the fading gold and whispered, just for Diesel, "Thank you for coming home." Noah set his sketchbook on the grass. "You know," he said softly, "the pines remember everyone who walks here. That's why the wind sounds different now." Miriam smiled, eyes shining. "It's the sound of belonging." Walt ambled over, sitting with them in silence. The world felt whole, maybe not healed, but healing. As the breeze rustled the pines, Avery thought of all they'd lost and all they'd found again. Diesel sighed, content and safe, his scars nothing more than old stories now. The camera of memory lingered on the children playing, on the townspeople gathered under lantern light, and on the pines swaying against the star-strewn sky, a reminder that hope, once planted, truly can outlive any storm.